What if the clearest truth Jesus ever spoke about, heaven, was never meant to be hidden at all, but quietly forgotten beneath centuries of noise? Imagine the evening air in ancient Galilee, the smell of dust and olive trees, the low hum of conversation as people settle around a fire. They have followed this carpenter for miles because his words feel different, gentle, yet weighty, mysterious, yet familiar, like remembering something your soul always knew. He begins not with thunder, but with stillness. His voice carries across the hill. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. No trumpet blast, no distant promise, just a calm announcement that something holy is already here. The crowd listens, unsure what to make of it. Heaven, they were taught, belonged beyond the stars or after death, but he speaks as if it has already stepped onto their soil. Across centuries, we have repeated those words, but few have paused to ask what he truly meant. Could it be that Jesus was describing a reality closer than breath, a dimension of life that starts the moment the heart awakens to love? The hidden gospel begins here, in the space between the known and the possible, in the gentle question that lingers long after the sermon ends. If heaven is near, why do we live as if it is far away? When the disciples looked into his eyes, they didn't see escape. They saw invitation. He was not pointing to clouds or golden streets, but to a kingdom growing quietly among them. Each word he spoke seemed to peel away the distance between God and man. The old world measured holiness by altitude, how high one could climb, how far one could reach. Jesus reversed it. He brought heaven downward into the soil of human hearts. Close your eyes and feel the shift. Heaven is not rushing toward us from a far horizon. It rises within like dawn through fog. It hums inside every act of mercy, every breath of gratitude. It is the unseen harmony that turns chaos into meaning. When Jesus said the kingdom is near, he was whispering to every weary soul that God has already moved in. So the question remains the same one heaven still asks each generation. Will you keep searching the sky, or will you notice the light that is already touching the earth beneath your feet? The answer is not shouted, it is lived. Perhaps that is why his teaching felt hidden, not because it was secret, but because it required stillness to hear. The hidden gospel begins, as all true revelations do, with quiet wonder. And somewhere in that wonder, heaven leans closer, waiting for us to remember that it was never lost, only overlooked. Centuries before our printed Bibles and painted cathedrals, small gatherings of believers met in homes lit by oil lamps. They had no stained glass, no choirs, only memory stories told softly, again and again, about the man who spoke of a kingdom already alive. They remembered his words as seed, not statute. Heaven, they said, was not a distant province but a presence moving through ordinary lives. It was what happened when forgiveness broke a chain, when generosity crossed a line, when love refused to quit. Those first followers called the message good news because it made the poor feel rich and the weary feel known. In their world, kingdoms rose by force and kept peace by fear. But Jesus described a rule without walls, a reign spread through mercy. They told one another that he had said, "The kingdom of heaven is like leaven hidden in flour," hidden, not absent, working quietly until everything is changed. And that picture shaped their prayers. They did not ask God to send heaven down. They asked to become the bread it would rise within. As years passed, the empire noticed power prefers clear borders, and heaven without borders frightened those who guarded them. Theology began to draw maps, to chart where heaven starts and who belongs. Creeds were written to define what once was felt. None of it was evil, but with each definition, a little mystery leaked away. Heaven drifted upward, away from soil and sorrow, until it was imagined mostly in the afterlife and a reward later, instead of a reality now. Yet, beneath that drift, the early whispers never died. Letters copied by trembling hands still carried the pulse of the original fire. "Set your minds on things above," Paul wrote, not to flee the earth, but to fill it with divine perspective. The hidden gospel survived in the hearts of those who kept listening for the nearness Jesus promised. Imagine one of them, an old disciple sitting by a window, and the parchment dim in fading light. He recalls the Galilean hills and the hush that followed every parable. He writes, not to preserve information, but to keep wonder alive. He knows the danger of forgetting that when heaven becomes remote, love grows cold. And so he reminds his readers and us, the kingdom still moves quietly, like yeast in the dough of the world. Every act of compassion releases its fragrance. Every moment of trust lets heaven breathe again through human hearts. What the early church remembered is what we must remember too, that Jesus did not tell us to climb to heaven, but to uncover it. It was never locked away. It was planted, waiting to rise. When the last candle flickers and the room grows still, his final line becomes prayer more than ink. "Lord, open our eyes to the kingdom within." The whisper that began on a hillside keeps echoing, and the forgotten nearness of heaven begins to stir once more. The sun hangs low above a field outside Capernaum. The crowd gathers again, fishermen with coarse hands, mothers holding quiet children, the curious and the skeptical, all pressed to hear. Jesus looks across the hills and begins not with doctrine, but with a story. A sower went out to sow. The listeners nod, they know soil, stones, thorns. But he speaks as though every grain carries a secret. His voice paints pictures that move slower than a heartbeat, each word falling like seed on their imagination. They expect parables to reveal moral lessons. Instead, he speaks of something invisible growing beneath the surface. Heaven, he says, is like that a seed buried in plain sight. Tiny, fragile, easily ignored, yet hidden within its silence is an entire future waiting to bloom. The people glance at one another. They can see the dirt beneath their feet, but can they see the kingdom sprouting under their lives? Later, he offers another image. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. Everyone smiles at the absurdity, the smallest seed becoming the largest tree, birds nesting in its shade. But the rhythm of his words lingers. Something in them recognizes the pattern: small beginnings, vast endings, heaven disguised as the ordinary. The crowd drifts home, wondering if perhaps the world is fuller than they thought. Years later, his followers retell the parables not as puzzles to solve, but as invitations to notice. They realize the soil he spoke of was the human heart. Some hearts are stony with fear, some tangled with distraction, some open and soft, ready to receive. The hidden gospel is not about escape, it is about cultivation. Heaven takes root wherever faith makes space. Pause here and let the image settle. A seed disappears into darkness, unseen for days, maybe weeks, yet even in stillness, life stirs. The soil does not shout, it listens, and so the soul learns to wait. We often ask God for signs of heaven, forgetting that heaven's language is growth slow, silent, unstoppable. The wind carries pollen, the rain sinks quietly, and the miracle happens without applause. Maybe that is why Jesus told stories instead of giving lectures. Stories germinate inside us. They move past argument and lodge in memory until one day they bloom into understanding. Each parable was a seed sown into history, meant to bloom when hearts were ready. And here we are, centuries later, still feeling their roots beneath our lives. So if the kingdom seems distant, perhaps it is only buried. Look again at the soil of your days, the small acts of patience, the moments of mercy, the prayers whispered when no one hears. That is where heaven is growing. Hidden, yes, but not absent. Quiet, but alive. The seed is already in the ground. The story is still unfolding. Night settles over the hills of Judea. The crowd has gone. The fires are dim. And only a few disciples remain close enough to ask the questions the others were too shy to speak aloud. One of them whispers, "Master, when will the kingdom of God come?" They expect a timeline, a sign in the heavens, perhaps an army of angels. Instead, Jesus smiles a patient, knowing smile and says quietly, "The kingdom of God is within you." The words fall into the silence like drops of clear water within you, not far away, not waiting beyond the stars, not reserved for the righteous few. The disciples stare at one another, trying to understand how a kingdom can exist inside the heart. They have followed him across storms and deserts. Now he points inward, as if the destination of their journey has been there all along. What did he mean? Perhaps he was naming what they had already begun to feel: the subtle peace that appeared whenever they believed him, the warmth that stirred when they forgave, the strange courage that rose when they loved their enemies. Each moment was a doorway. Each act of mercy was a glimpse through the veil. Heaven was not approaching from outside. It was awakening from within. Close your eyes and breathe. Feel the quiet that his sentence still carries through the centuries. The world tells us that meaning lies somewhere else, on a mountaintop, in success, in the approval of others. But the Christ of of the hidden gospel keeps pointing homeward. He invites us to discover that the divine kingdom is built from invisible foundations: faith, humility, compassion, surrender. These are not achievements, they are awakenings. Imagine walking through your ordinary day, the market noise, the weight of work, the ache of worry, and sensing underneath it a gentle pulse, a current of grace that never stops moving. That current is the kingdom. It hums beneath conversation, beneath failure, beneath every heartbeat that still longs for God. It is what turns breath into prayer and sorrow into strength. When Jesus said, "The kingdom is within," he was not speaking poetry. He was revealing geography, the map of heaven drawn across the human soul. It means the distance between God and us was an illusion all along. The door was never locked. It only waited to be opened by awareness. Each moment we choose love over fear, we step through that door again. So tonight, let the noise fade. Listen for the stillness he spoke of. Somewhere inside, beyond words, beyond worry, but the kingdom is already alive, bright as dawn, calm as a whisper, near as your next breath. Heaven is not coming later. It has already begun. It is waiting to be noticed in you. Time has a way of stretching simple truths until they seem out of reach. Generations after the apostles, new empires rose and empires fell, and with them, the imagination of faith began to shift. The earliest believers had spoken of heaven as breath, as presence, as the quiet nearness of God. But as centuries turned, fear found its way into theology. Heaven became reward. Earth became trial. People began to speak of escape more than transformation. In cathedrals carved of stone, the message of Jesus still echoed, but now it sounded higher, farther, beyond the clouds. Pain was to be endured, not healed. Joy postponed, not practiced. The kingdom of God was measured in distance instead of depth. Faith turned its gaze upward, forgetting that the same God who painted the stars also washed feet. You can almost picture it: candles flickering against painted ceilings, worshippers staring into murals of distant light while the poor waited outside the doors. Heaven had become property of the future, something promised to the faithful but withheld from the living. Yet beneath the ritual, the hidden gospel still whispered. The Spirit kept moving through ordinary hearts, reminding them of the carpenter's voice. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast hidden in dough, hidden, still working, even when forgotten. The shift wasn't born of malice. It was born of longing. People wanted a place safe from sorrow, and so they pushed heaven as far from sorrow as they could imagine. But Jesus had already stood among the broken and called them blessed. He never told them to flee the world. He taught them how to find the sacred within it. The truest tragedy of forgetting is that we begin to wait for what has already arrived. Pause and feel the ache of that waiting, the centuries of eyes turned skyward, searching for a gate that was already open. We still do it in subtler ways, chasing peace through success, belonging through approval, joy through possession, always somewhere else, always later. Yet every breath carries the same invitation that echoed beside Galilee's lake. The kingdom of heaven is at hand, not tomorrow, not after death, but now. Perhaps that is why so many hearts feel restless. We were never designed to postpone eternity. We were meant to live it. Heaven was never the reward for living rightly. It was the rhythm of living lovingly. To forget that is to wander. To remember it is to come home. And so this chapter of our story turns gently from forgetting to remembering. The clouds begin to thin. The light starts to return. Somewhere beneath doctrine and dust, the hidden gospel stirs again, whispering that heaven was never far, never lost, only waiting to be seen with new eyes. Something remarkable is happening in our age, not loud, not announced by trumpet or fire, but quietly, the way dawn arrives before anyone names it. All around the world, hearts are awakening again to what the first disciples knew, that heaven was never sealed away. It simply waited beneath the noise of religion and routine. In coffee shops, in hospital rooms, on long drives home, people are remembering the nearness of God. It is not a movement of slogans or platforms. It is the slow return of awareness, a whisper making its way back through the human heart. Modern life has taught us to look outward for everything: success, safety, meaning. Yet, in the still moments, something deeper calls. When the rush fades, when screens go dark, we sense it, a softness, a presence, as though eternity is breathing under our skin. That quiet pull is the same message Jesus spoke beside the sea. It is heaven reminding us that it never left. Scholars call it renewal. Mystics call it awakening. But perhaps it is simply memory. The hidden gospel lives in memory and the recollection of how close love truly is. Every generation forgets for a while, and every generation must remember again. And we are in one of those remembering times. The forgotten parables are being read, not as riddles, but as invitations. The words, "The kingdom of heaven is within you," are beginning to sound less like poetry and more like direction. Listen to the stories people tell. Forgiveness that came when they least deserved it. Peace found in hospital corridors. Laughter that rose after grief. These are not coincidences. They are glimpses. Heaven breaking surface through ordinary life. No clouds parted, no thunder rolled, only the quiet realization that God was there all along. The hidden gospel does not return through argument. It returns through kindness. It does not shout its doctrine. It breathes its presence. Each act of patience becomes a sermon. Each moment of gratitude a hymn. Wherever love chooses to stay, heaven reappears. This is how revival truly happens, not in spectacle, but in sincerity. Perhaps that is why Jesus spoke so gently about the kingdom. Noise fades, gentleness endures. The same power that turned water into wine now turns ordinary hours into sacred time. The same Spirit that hovered over creation still hovers over your life, waiting for your attention. And when you notice, even for a heartbeat, the distance between earth and heaven collapses. The quiet return is not coming someday. It is happening now. It unfolds each time someone chooses compassion over cynicism, peace over pride, love over fear. That is the sound of heaven coming home. And as it returns, it does what it has always done, remind us that we never truly lost it. We only forgot to listen for its still, small voice. Every path worth walking begins with footprints already pressed into the dust. When Jesus spoke of the kingdom of heaven, he did not leave his listeners guessing how to reach it. He showed them, step by step, what it looks like when eternity touches the ground. His way was never hidden behind miracles or mystery. It was traced through mercy, forgiveness, humility, and a love so tangible it changed the air around him. The steps are simple, yet they cost everything. The first is forgiveness. It is not weakness, it is strength turned gentle. To forgive is to set the prisoner free and realize the prisoner was you. Heaven begins there, where resentment finally exhales and peace moves in. Then comes compassion, the practice of seeing others as God sees them. Jesus looked at crowds who misunderstood him and still called them sheep, still fed them bread. Compassion turns judgment into prayer, anger into empathy, distance into nearness. Next is humility. The world climbs ladders, the kingdom kneels. In washing his disciples' feet, Jesus revealed that greatness has never been about height, but about depth, how far one is willing to bend in love. Each act of humble service lowers the veil a little more, letting heaven's light spill through. And then there is simplicity, the quiet art of needing less to feel whole. Blessed are the pure in heart, he said, for they shall see God. Purity is not perfection, it is clarity, the heart unclouded by endless wanting. These steps are not a staircase upward, they are circles inward, drawing the soul closer to the place where the kingdom has already begun. Walk them slowly. Each is a rhythm, a breath, a returning. When we forgive, heaven heals. When we show mercy, heaven moves. When we love, heaven reigns. The path is not about arrival, it is about awareness. Imagine following him along the Galilean road. The dust rises with each step. The sun paints the hills gold. Around you are fishermen, tax collectors, doubters, and dreamers, all walking the same road, all learning that the kingdom is not above their heads, but beside their hearts. Jesus doesn't rush them. He matches their pace, speaks in parables, waits for understanding to blossom like wildflowers at their feet. If you listen carefully, those same footsteps echo still. They lead through your daily life, through the moments you choose peace instead of pride, generosity instead of fear. Each decision becomes sacred ground. The map to heaven is not drawn on parchment. It's traced in behavior, in patience, in love that endures when it isn't returned. And so the hidden gospel becomes a path, not a riddle. It isn't a mystery to solve, but a walk to begin. The steps are ancient, yet every one is new each morning. Follow them long enough, and you will find that you have not climbed away from the world at all. You have brought heaven into it. There are moments when the world seems to pause, when sunlight catches on rain-soaked leaves, when laughter rises in a hospital hallway, when forgiveness breaks through years of silence, and for an instant, everything feels aligned. But these are the thin places where earth and heaven touch. Jesus' teachings were meant to create those moments, to train our eyes to see eternity glimmering through the ordinary. When he healed the sick, it was not just power on display. It was heaven revealing its character, restoring, reconciling, making whole. Every touch, every meal shared with sinners, every story about lost sheep and prodigal sons was a reflection showing what the unseen kingdom looks like when it breaks the surface of human life. The earth, long aching under the weight of separation, began to mirror heaven again. The veil that fear had drawn between sacred and secular started to tear. Even now, the same reflection continues. It happens when enemies meet and choose peace instead of pride. It happens when a parent forgives a wandering child, or a stranger offers kindness with nothing to gain. These are not small things, they are windows. Through them, the light of the kingdom spills into our time and space. Heaven was never meant to remain unseen. It is reflected each time love takes form. Look around, and you will find its traces in a friend's patience, in a song that quiets your heart, in the courage of someone who keeps hoping against the odds. The hidden gospel isn't only spoken, it is embodied. The more we live by heaven's rhythm, the more the world begins to resonate with it. The prayer Jesus taught, on earth as it is in heaven, was never a wish for later. It was a blueprint for now. Sometimes this reflection feels fragile, easy to lose in the noise of the modern world. But light is stubborn. Even when clouds hide it, dawn always finds a way back. Every act of grace, every moment of beauty is a rebellion against despair. It's the earth remembering what it was made for. The fields still sing, the stars still declare, and humanity, though weary, still carries the imprint of its creator. So when the world feels dark, remember, heaven has not vanished. It is reflected in the simplest places, in the smallest mercies, in the quiet persistence of love. The task is not to escape the earth, but to polish its mirror until it shines again. As we do, something extraordinary happens. The sacred stops feeling distant, and life itself begins to glow with meaning. That is when heaven is no longer a promise on the horizon, but a presence in the moment. And the world, for a breath, looks just as God intended it to be. There is a moment after every storm when the air feels new, that the world smells of rain and forgiveness. Light breaks through the clouds, and everything, the trees, the soil, even the smallest blade of grass, seems to breathe again. This is what heaven feels like when it draws near. Not a distant realm descending with trumpets, but a tenderness arriving quietly, meeting us where we are. When Jesus rose from the tomb, he did not rush to the temple or to the powerful. He appeared first in gardens and along lonely roads, to a woman weeping, to friends hiding in fear, to a doubter who needed to touch his scars. Each encounter was a message. Heaven is not beyond reach. It comes to the broken, the uncertain, the waiting. The kingdom meets us not when we are perfect, but when we are present. This is the great reversal of the hidden gospel. Heaven has always been coming toward us, faster than we could run from it. We chase it through ritual and achievement, yet it finds us in rest. It is the love that waits when we turn away, the peace that visits in sleepless hours. Even in the shadows, it stands beside us, whispering what the angels once declared: peace on earth, goodwill toward men. I think of the countless ways this nearness reveals itself. A prayer answered, not with thunder, but with timing. A door that closes only to guide you to something gentler. The sudden warmth that fills a room when forgiveness replaces pride. None of these are accidents. They are visitations, little resurrections, moments when heaven meets you exactly where you thought you were alone. The mistake we often make is assuming we must ascend to reach God. But the story of Jesus tells the opposite. God descended. He came into our dust, our hunger, our heartbreak. He entered the very places we avoid and filled them with himself. The tomb was not the exit of heaven, it was its doorway into the human story. Since then, the sacred has refused to stay separated. Heaven keeps meeting us here, over and over, through grace that feels like homecoming. So pause for a moment. Notice the rhythm of your breath. Feel the ground beneath you. You are standing, even now, in the presence of a kingdom that will never end. Its gates are open, its light unspent. The hidden gospel was never about finding heaven somewhere else. It was about remembering that it already found you. In the stillness between heartbeats, in the kindness of a stranger, in the quiet assurance that you are loved, heaven is here. It always has been. Every journey with God ends where it began, in silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence that listens when words fade and striving ceases. Something ancient and kind begins to speak. This is the stillness that opens the gate to heaven. It isn't reached by climbing or pleading. It opens by surrender, the gentle unclosing of the heart that finally stops resisting love. Imagine a quiet hillside at dawn. The light hasn't broken yet, but the horizon glows faintly, promising warmth. A soft breeze moves through the olive branches. The same wind had once brushed against the robes of the teacher who said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." In this hush, at the distance between earth and eternity disappears. Nothing needs to be proven. Nothing needs to be fixed. Heaven is present in the pause itself. The noise of the world keeps us restless. We scroll, we hurry, we fill every space with sound. Yet the kingdom moves on a different rhythm, slow, patient, rhythmic as breath. When we stop long enough to notice that rhythm, heaven begins to breathe with us. The stillness doesn't erase pain, it holds it in compassion until pain softens into wisdom. It doesn't cancel life's noise, It teaches us to hear the sacred tone hidden beneath it. Close your eyes now. Listen. There is a heartbeat in the silence. The same heartbeat that pulsed in Bethlehem, that paused on Calvary, that thundered again outside an empty tomb. It echoes still inside every living soul. The hidden gospel has always been about this recognition. God's presence is not rare. Our awareness is. Stillness is how awareness returns. The mystics called it union. The poets called it peace. The prophets called it glory. But it feels, in the end, like rest. Rest for the mind that is run too far, for the heart that is carried too much, for the spirit that forgot it was already home. This rest is not the end of the story. It is the revelation that there was never a separation to begin with. Heaven has been whispering through every breath, waiting for the moment you would finally be quiet enough to hear. Stay here for a while. Let the world slow down around you. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across a steady sky. The gate is open. There is nothing to force, nothing to fear. Only this presence, gentle, holy, near. This is the stillness Jesus knew when he prayed alone in the night, when he broke bread with friends, when he spoke peace to the storm. The stillness that opens the gate is not somewhere far away. It is right here, within you, waiting to be remembered.